Among her major news stories were the election of George W. Bush as president, the 2003 lawmaker boycott of the Texas legislature, fatal standoff of the Branch Davidian compound near Waco, and the ensuing federal trial that happened afterwards. Also, she's covered the San Antonio Spurs during the David Robinson era. I'm sure that kept you pretty busy. She's done extensive freelancing reporting, including in-depth open government projects for the nonprofit Center for Public Integrity, as well as business, health, and travel stories for newspapers, magazines, and nonprofits. Shannon has also been an adjunct journalism instructor at the University of Texas in Austin. So without any further ado, please welcome Kelley Shannon, our keynote speaker.
It's great to be here with SPJ. I have a long history with SPJ myself. When I was a student at the University of Texas at Austin, I got involved with SPJ, and one year I was an officer, and like Kim, my job was to round up guest speakers. And that's always fun, but I'll tell you, you know who one of our biggest, I would say the biggest hit during my tenure was your very own Fort Worth journalist, Mike Cochran. Yeah. He was great. He was nice enough to come down and talk to us eager students, and I had the pleasure of first meeting Mike when I was a teenager, and he was covering the Cullen Davis trials, and my father was one of the prosecutors in one of those trials, Joe Shannon, and he happens to be here tonight too, over at Tom Williams' table. So thanks for being here. It's good to see you guys. So when Mike came and spoke to us, SPJ students at the University of Texas, I don't know if you remember this, Mike, but you were willing to do it, but you said, I don't want it to be in some sterile classroom. I want us to go to Schultz's Beer Garden. Do you remember? Oh, sure. Well, your evil twin had fun that night. Yeah, and we all did. We students were happy to oblige. And imagine, then the drinking age was only 18 or 19, so it was all perfectly legal and everything. So we had a great time. And Mike has been a great mentor to me through the years. And when I later worked for Associated Press, he taught me how to cover criminal trials and golf tournaments. But that's another beer story in itself, so we'll leave it there. I also was involved with SPJ in San Antonio, and we raised a lot of money for students, for college student scholarships, by doing the gridiron shows in San Antonio. And those were lots of fun. We journalists would make fun of the newsmakers, raise a lot of money through tickets and other donations. And it was real in-your-face humor and very kind of off the edge sometimes, but it was always a lot of fun, and everybody enjoyed it, even the newsmakers. So that was great. So the common theme for me with SPJ always seems to be students and helping students and being involved as a student. And how many students do we have here tonight? Show of hands? Quite a few. Great. Good. Good deal. You students, you young journalists are really in a unique position, as you know. First of all, congratulations on deciding to embark upon this field. It's a very rewarding field. We are fortunate enough to live in a country where you're able to do this, and you do have freedom of speech and freedom of press. And that's one of the things that made me decide to go through with it rather than going to law school or doing some other things I was deciding. Is like, you know what? I live in a country where, darn it, I can do this, and I'm going to. And so I applaud you for that. But y'all are in a unique position. You're going to have to be living out how is the news delivered. As we all know, it's changing before our very eyes. So you'll be part of that, deciding how it's going to happen, deciding on what kind of news is reported. Will we get lazier with our story selections? I hope not. But will we remain committed to the hard work it takes to dig out detailed, records-based stories of public importance? I hope that's the direction you decide to go and keep at. How will people view our profession? As you know, we've been in a bit of a downturn as far as public perception in recent months, but I feel like this goes in waves. I've seen it before. I remember one time covering a state Republican convention, like late 80s, and there were T-shirts and signs and everything there. Blame it on the media, So this is nothing new. It goes in waves, and there's times when we are considered the champions and protecting the public. Think about the latter days of the Vietnam War, or think of Watergate. So these times, journalism is very popular, and it's seen for the good that it is. In recent months, with the recent election, of course. There's been a tendency to want to bash the media. We're the ones that people want to bash. So, you just need to hang in there, continue with it, and, make sure our profession is seen for what it's supposed to be, and that's holding public officials accountable and being factually based and fair. We want accurate, fair, meaningful reporting with a strong ethical foundation. If you do that, you can't go wrong. And first off, you're going to be able to look yourself in the mirror every day, which is very important. Second of all, you will convey to the public the importance of journalism and why we're here, and we are doing it for everybody, for our society, for our democracy. So keep at that. To do that kind of reporting, though, we need the free flow of accurate information. Bottom line. And, we rely on access to public records and public meetings and sometimes even whistleblower information to get this accomplished, to hold our government accountable. And remember, it's our government. We, the people, it's our government. Don't ever forget that. In Texas, we're able to hold government accountable and find records and back up, information, factually based stories, in large part with the help of the Texas Open Meetings Act and the Texas Public Information Act. And, some of you students, I'm sure you're starting to get familiar with these laws, but these are two very important open government laws in our state. And if you're not that familiar with them, I'd urge you to start getting familiar with them. I wished I had gotten even more familiar with all this when I was in college. I came to it a little bit later than that as far as using it in my reporting and such. But as far as the Public Information Act goes, I'm sorry to tell you, to bring you some very troubling news about what's going on at our state capitol with the Texas Public Information Act. And I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but there's some startling stuff going on that you all need to be aware of. The Public Information Act has just been beaten down in the last couple of years, and I'll go into a little more detail in a moment, but it's almost like there's a mob mentality going on right now at the Texas Capitol and related agencies, and it's like the forces of darkness have seen, all right, we've got the public information beaten down, let's hold it down, don't let it get back up, and there are business interests, there are other interests that are trying their very best to make our Public Information Act weak. And as many of you may know, the Public Information Act of Texas, it started as the Texas Open Records Act in the early 1970s, and it later was renamed the Texas Public Information Act, and it came about in a time of reform-mindedness after the Sharpstown scandal, or, as that had been breaking. How many in the room, I guess most of you, at least over a certain age, probably know of the Sharpstown scandal, right? Again, to the students, a lot of us know it, and some of us even studied it in our college classes. And if you don't know of it, get familiar with it, because it's something that, it could happen again. But anyway, this was what brought about the atmosphere that made it, the passage of the Open Records Act. Well, for years, ours was considered one of the strongest in the nation, for 40 years now. And part of that is because, we presume records are open unless they fall under a certain exception in the Act to where they're able to be kept confidential, kept from the public. But, it has to be done very carefully, and a government agency has to seek an attorney general ruling generally, not always, but in most cases, in order to keep that information from us. And that's real different from a lot of states. In some states, a governmental entity can just say, no, I'm keeping the information from you. And then it's up to you, the requester of the information, to start doing the appeals and prying that information loose. In our state, the burden is on the government, not the individual. So the individual requester in our state has a lot of power under the law as it's been since the 70s. The other thing is we need to remember what we're talking about with these public records that we're trying to get. We're talking about budget documents, public official schedules, emails, letters, and contracts between government and private entities. All of these shine light on how our government functions and what's going on. It's all essential to government accountability, okay? Now, 2 years ago in 2015, I'll try not to go into too much detail here, but I'm going to hit some highlights, and Tom Williams will probably tell me I missed a couple of important points, but I'm going to say it from layman's terms here, that our Supreme Court of Texas made 2 rulings in 2015 that severely damaged the Public Information Act. This was right after the legislature met in 2015. One of them has become known as the Boeing ruling. It was Boeing aircraft, and it dealt with something that went on in San Antonio. They did not want to release a lot of their documents and sued, and anyway, it was a long-running case. The result was a ruling by the Texas Supreme Court. How many of you guys have heard about the Boeing ruling, by the way? Anybody? Okay, a few. All right, well, good. I'm glad I'm here to tell you about something you might not know yet. Well, this Boeing ruling, the Supreme Court ruled that all kinds of government contracts with our taxpayer money can be kept off limits to the public, out of public view, if it gives the government or one of these third-party companies a competitive disadvantage. In the past, only the governmental entities could claim this, and it was a higher standard at that. Now these third-party companies, like the Boeings of the world and many others, can claim, oh, we don't want this information released. It'll put us at a competitive disadvantage. And not just a decisive disadvantage or substantial disadvantage, just any disadvantage. So now, since just in recent months, like over the past year, we've had some 600 rulings from the Attorney General's office saying, nope, these contracts don't have to be released. And they're just going by, the court ruling and the way the law is being interpreted. So you've got situations, and some of your reporters in here can probably tell you their firsthand experience with it, but like school service contracts in the DFW area can't be gotten to, like buses, food service, what have you. The $265 million power plant in Denton, those contracts, they're having trouble getting those. In the Rio Grande Valley in McAllen, the city of McAllen has decided it does not want to release how much it paid the singer Enrique Iglesias to sing at a holiday event, because guess what? They might have to, compete for another star next year, and it would put them at a competitive disadvantage. This is all taxpayer money. I mean, it just starts making my blood boil when I talk about it. So that's a real very upsetting ruling, and then what we are trying to correct with legislation at the Capitol currently, okay? Then another bad ruling by the Texas Supreme Court in 2015 dealt with the Greater Houston Partnership case. And this is an economic development arm in Houston, and they get a lot of public money, or they did get a lot of public money. And they said, we don't want to have to open up our books, but the way our Public Information Act had always been interpreted had been this thing called the Nealon test. There were several prongs of it. If you're a nonprofit, you're taking public money, you're acting sort of in a government agency-like fashion, you're sort of acting almost as an arm of the government, some of these types of descriptions, then that would put you in the category of governmental body and then subject to scrutiny, okay? Well, that's another rough ruling from the Texas Supreme Court, and we have a bill that we are working on that is kind of on life support at the moment, and we are trying to get that decision reversed. So those are two of our biggest bills. Not the decision reversed, I shouldn't say that, but we are trying to get the situation reversed to where we take it back to the way things were before these two rulings. We can't reverse a court decision, but we're trying to reverse the whole scenario of what we're operating under, and that means rewriting the law to address what these court rulings came up with. So we're trying to repair the Public Information Act that has always been one of the strongest in the country, and we want to get these bills passed. These two big bills have passed the Senate fairly early. Now they've made it over to the House, and they're sponsored in the Senate by Senator Kirk Watson from Austin. And here's a local tie for you guys. In the House, they're sponsored by Representative Giovanni Capriglione from Southlake, and he's a very big open government advocate. So it's bipartisan. We have a Democrat in the Senate, a Republican in the House working on this. But we are getting thwarted every step of the way. Businesses and a lot of other types of entities who think they might be swept into the Public Information Act are fighting us tooth and nail. And you wouldn't believe some of the stuff that's going on. They like it just the way it is after these Supreme Court rulings, and they're not about to let anything else happen. These forces against us. So these are in the House committee. We had a hearing on them Monday night, very late night. They made us wait all the way to the end on these, and now they're sitting in that committee. It's called the House Government Transparency and Operation Committee. Well, the chairman of the committee has made it known he doesn't like the bills, and there's a lot of business opposition, as I mentioned. So we really need them voted out of this committee so they can get to the full House and then have a chance of passage. So anything you guys can do to, write about these issues, editorialize, if you're able to, call legislators. We need them knowing that there's a lot of people out here in the state that want transparency, that want open government, and the time is now. It's a really very crucial moment because the legislature ends May 29th, so we don't have much time, and there's a lot of deadlines setting in. If they don't start moving in the next few days, guess what? Our Public Information Act it's almost a shell of its former self in these regards, and I think the Boeing situation particularly is a rough one for your day-to-day reporting, just trying to watch the flow of money, trying to hold these companies accountable that are dealing with government, trying to hold government officials accountable. So if you want more information about those, let me know afterwards, and I can give it to you. We're also working on several other real important measures. One of them, another bad court ruling, but this wasn't the Supreme Court, it was a regional appeals court, put dates of birth off limits in public records. We haven't seen the full effect of it yet, but the knowledge about this is starting to trickle out. It didn't get heard by the Supreme Court, but it's starting to filter out around the state and in the Attorney General rulings. But you reporters know how important dates of birth are in public records. I mean, even just basic cop shop reporting, you want to be accurate. If you have that date of birth, you can understand who you're identifying. Is it the John Smith or the Alex Garcia who's 25 years old? Is it the one that's 38 years old? Is it the one who's 68? Also, candidate record, people filing for office in their candidate applications. We're finding all kinds of places where these are getting redacted, dates of birth. So somebody running for school board, are they 18 years old or are they 89 years old? Dates of birth are real important. There is a couple of bright spots. The juvenile court access bill that Tom Williams has been working on is moving along. What this does, and you guys in Fort Worth know about this, we've had some high-profile juvenile cases and courtrooms being closed or threatened to be closed. And what this bill does is it puts in place some procedures if a judge is going to close off that juvenile courtroom, how it needs to happen. And it wouldn't just be like at the whim of an individual judge. It would be like, okay, this hearing needs to happen, this question needs to be answered, this sort of thing. So, kudos to Tom for working on that. And it is hopefully going to pass. It's moving. We're getting attorneys' fees clarified for Public Information Act cases. We're hoping that has some traction. A custodian loophole bill where, if a public official does business on their private device, that's government record. That's already in law. We've all heard about all this, at the federal level, of course, but at the state level too. It's your private device, your private email, what have you, but it's public record if it's public business. Well, this bill would help us get at those records more so than we're able to right now. That one, by the way, and dates of birth are both just still sitting in that Government Transparency Committee. Haven't gotten a vote. We're still waiting on a vote on those. And then one other one, that I wanted to mention, the dead suspects bill. There is a loophole in the law that allows police departments to keep information secret if the suspect is dead and never did go to trial and get convicted. And it's really meant to protect the innocent and protect the living, but it's being used to just not release records because a suspect is dead. And guess what? They're not going to be convicted because they're dead. They're not going to trial. So there's a lot more on that one if you want to read up on it. Very interesting. And to top it all off, we've got bills that are trying to reduce the standard for libel for public officials. and one that tries to gut the reporter's shield law, the reporter's privilege law. We are working behind the scenes to try to diminish the effects of those, and we're hoping that's how it all ends up. All this is troubling, I know. It is to me anyway. But it's possible we may well have a good outcome, and with your help and with a lot of public attention on these very important matters, I think it could be a positive outcome overall. I hope that outcome is going to be the preservation of the Texas Public Information Act as we know it. It's essential to the free flow of accurate information, and that knowledge is essential to good journalism and essential to our democracy. And as James Madison said, knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. Thank you. Okay, all right.
So we made a little room in the program to have just a little Q&A. So if anyone has any questions for Kelley, start thinking of those. In the meantime, I kind of wanted to start with one quick question. And you did touch on this, Kelley, but if you could just elaborate a little bit more, what should we as journalists and so many students here be doing right now to help fight this? Because this really is scary stuff when you think about what we do on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. It is. Well, one thing you can do is do reports on it, and you can do that objectively. It's not like you have to get on air and be an advocate, but you can explain what information is now closed off because of some of these rulings and what the legislation in the Capitol is trying to achieve. And you can give some real-life examples in your own community and how it affects the people. So I think that's one thing. And then those of you who are editorial writers or column writers can certainly do that sort of thing that would help draw attention to it as well.
Great. Let's just take a couple of questions. Just Julian, you're right in front of me. Go ahead, stand up so that everybody can hear you, if you don't mind, and give us your name. We're all family here, right?
Rodriguez from UT Arlington. So this is the Boeing ruling is not related to national security or privacy issues, correct?
That's right. That's right.
So how exactly are they justifying this? I don't understand quite well about the disadvantage that this creates.
Well, you're not the only one who doesn't understand it. We have a committee chairman who doesn't understand it either, I might say. But there's a lot of other people at the Capitol, lobbyists, who don't understand it, who scrutinize this stuff. So, the chairman's not the only one. But what it is, and I should have mentioned this earlier, I meant to, is we always have had in the Public Information Act the trade secrets exemption, okay? We're not trying to find out anybody's secret sauce, right? And we still have the trade secrets exemption. So these companies, if they really want to keep their information off limits for real proprietary trade secrets reasons, they have that part of the act they can go to. But what this does, and it was really interpreted for a long time just to be used by governments so that they could get the best deal for the people in a current bidding situation, right? That's how it was always interpreted. Well, now this ruling has spread it out to just anybody who's doing business with the government can claim it, and it's lowered the bar to that any competitive disadvantage. So it's a competitive advantage exemption, but used to the bar was higher. And it was meant for government so that they could get a good deal for us on their current competitive situation. I know it's kind of hard to explain succinctly, and like I said, we've had multiple meetings at the Capitol trying to explain it to any number of groups, I can tell you.
I've been writing about in 2014 in Colombia and South America, they passed a law that basically mirrors the Freedom of Information Act of the federal government. And all of these things that are going on are things that to some extent will affect the way it will work in Colombia. So that's why I'm so interested in this topic.
Yeah, and we do have the Federal Freedom of Information Act in the United States too. And just only recently did a provision get added to it to have that presumption of openness, that records are presumed open, that we in Texas have always enjoyed. So in some ways we were a step ahead in that regard. But there are a few differences between the federal act and the Texas Act. Some states in our country mirror pretty closely the federal act. And ours, kind of takes a different shape and form here and there. But the premise is the same. And if you're going for federal records and if you're going for state records, you got to use the two different acts. But interestingly, in one of the the cases the other night in the testimony about that dead suspects bill. It was a family, their son, who was 18, got beat up and tased and died in the hands of the Mesquite Police Department, and they couldn't get the records because of that loophole in the Texas law. Well, what they did was the FBI ended up investigating it and didn't file a case, but they started thinking, well, you know what? I bet the FBI got all those records from the Mesquite Police Department. So they filed federal Freedom of Information Act requests with the FBI and said, we know you're not going to prosecute it, but would you please send us the records? We just want to know what happened to our son in his final moments. Well, about 6 months later, videos, documents, all this started arriving in the mail from the federal Freedom of Information. And that's how they were able to get at what had happened with the Mesquite Police Department. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and luckily that family was smart enough to figure out how to do that and do that route.
How about a round of applause for Kelley here? Great information.